It was the summer of 2012. I have a late birthday, so I was still 15 when all my friends were 16. They all had jobs for the summer, but nobody would hire me because I was only 15. I started looking for off-the-books jobs on Craigslist. I found an ad titled, "Looking for House Cleaning Services, Paying $10 an Hour." The ad had two pictures of the house, one outside and one inside. It was a typical middle-class house. He lived in the next town over. The only way to contact him was by email, so I emailed him telling him I was only 15 years old and was willing to clean his house for $10 an hour. He responded in 10 minutes, telling me his work schedule and when he would need me to be available. I told him that was okay, and then he asked me if I had means of transportation to get there every day. I didn't even realize that my mom wouldn't be able to drive me every day. Oddly, he offered to give me a lift to and from every single day. He said he worked close, so coming home to give me a ride wouldn't be a problem. I agreed without even asking my mom, so the man asked for my address. I gave it to him, and he said he would be over at 8:30 a.m. on Monday to pick me up. Come Monday, I met him outside. He drove a black '05 Nissan Maxima. He himself had a black beard and a Mets hat on. He didn't seem dressed ready to go to work, but I didn't think much about that. He introduced himself as James, and then dropped me off and gave me the key. He told me to just straighten everything out and such. Then he drove off in a hurry. I found it really weird that he trusted me, a 15-year-old he had never met, to be in his house alone. His house wasn't even too messy. All I did was just fold some clothes, wash some dishes, and used a hand vacuum to clean some of the carpets. The only problem, it was extremely hot in the house, even hotter than outside. It seemed all the windows were sealed shut, and I didn't want to turn on the AC without permission. This went on for 6 hours before he came back, handed me $60, and dropped me off back home. He seemed extremely nice, and I felt I'd lucked out finding that ad. This went on for a good 2 weeks, and my mom was okay with it since James was actually paying me. Then, one Friday night, I woke up feeling really thirsty, so I got up to get some water. I looked out my window, and I saw somebody standing there looking into my room. I screamed, and my parents came running over, but the person outside took off before they got there. The next time I went in, it was at least 100 degrees outside. I asked James if I could turn on the AC, but he said it was broken. He told me to just take off my clothes if I got hot. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he was serious. I felt really uncomfortable after that. He dropped me off, and I did the same work that I had been doing. It was at least 105 degrees in the house. I had to work shirtless and constantly go outside where it was just a little cooler. The day dragged on, but I just barely made it through. The next day, on the way to his house, James told me that he had the day off from work. He told me he would just help me out. I was not happy to hear this. I would rather just be alone in the house. He seemed to slowly follow me into whatever room I went to clean. I eventually had to go to the bathroom, so I ran upstairs and made sure he wasn't following me. But in the bathroom, I made a shocking discovery. Up in the corner of the room, I found a small camera pointing from out of the wall, just barely visible. I scanned the room for more, and sure enough, there was one in the bottom corner as well. I started searching the whole bathroom for more cameras. I checked under the sink, but what I found was much worse. There were 2 huge stacks of VHS tapes, each one with a sticky note attached with someone's name on it. The one on the top was my name. I almost threw up then and there. I had to find a way to get home safely. James then knocked on the door, asking if I was alright. I said I wasn't feeling good, and asked if he could drive me home. He said okay. I stepped outside, and he told me he had to go as well, so he stepped into the bathroom. For the first half of the car ride, he didn't say anything to me, and the road he was taking me on wasn't familiar. In fact, I noticed that the direction we were heading in was the complete opposite of my house. Where are we going?" I asked. He looked at me and said, "What were you doing in the bathroom?" I started to panic. I didn't answer, so he asked again in a much angrier voice. We were stopped at a traffic light, so I took that opportunity to unlock the door and escape the car. I ran away from sight before calling my mom, crying into the phone, telling her to pick me up, She came over as soon as possible. She immediately reported James, and the police found the tapes under his sink. Some of the tapes contained much worse things than kids just cleaning the house. The scariest thing, some of the kids seen in the tapes are still missing to this day. He was arrested and tried for child pornography, kidnapping, and some other charges. I'm happy I jumped out of that car, because I don't know where he was taking me. This happened about 3 months ago. Me and my roommate decided on getting a used couch, so I thought Craigslist would be a great place for used furniture. I scrolled through about 3 pages before finding a black leather couch. It was in really good condition, and it had a really good price, around $200. I told myself this was too good to be true, and man, I should have listened to myself. We arranged a price, and the guy told me to meet him at his place over email. My roommate was out working overtime, so I had to go alone. The address was a little ways out of town. The house was surrounded by trees. You had to go through the drive-thru to be able to see it. I got out of my car and knocked on the door. This house was different. It was small and wooden, and it looked pretty eerie. When I knocked the 3rd time, I heard creaks on the wood floor coming from inside. Anyone could tell it was footsteps, but it sounded like they were tiptoeing. Then, I heard a faint, muffled voice through the door. "Hey, are you the couch guy?" But they sounded pretty rushed. So I responded, yes I am." He said back, "Okay, come around back, the couch is there." I felt a little weirded out by it, but I brushed it off. When I came around back, I saw something that I won't forget. I saw 4 tall men dressed in black robes with their hands together, and in front of them was a pit with a hatch and chain on it. Then I heard the same voice say, "Where's your friend?" I booked it out of there and frantically shoved the key in my car and started it. I looked out the mirror and saw the front door fly open. I shifted into first and floored it out of there. The thing that makes me uneasy to this day is that in the emails, I never told him I had a roommate. I was about 12 years old. I was looking for some craft storage since I got a lot for Christmas. The ones at the stores were really pricey, so me and my 27-year-old sister looked for some on Craigslist. We found someone offering a huge tote for only $10. That would mean getting a $90 discount, so we checked it out. The person lived relatively close to us, so we gave the guy our email. He emailed us within an hour and asked where we should meet. I said we should meet at Dollar Tree since it was a short walk away. He, to my surprise, asked to meet at my home. I lived in an apartment, so that would be inconvenient, so I said that we lived farther away. He said he could drive, but we said no. So we eventually said it was okay to meet at Dollar Tree, but he could only meet up at 9 p.m. I said that's okay, even though it would be dark by then. He said to meet up today. My sister worked the night shift tonight, so she said I could walk there and back and to just bring my wagon so I could just put the tote in it. She gave me $10 and I started walking at 8:30. I arrived just on time and I saw an old, knocked up '06 Kia. I assumed it was him, so I yelled, "Hey, got the tote?" He got out of his car and said he left it at home. He asked if I wanted to take a drive with him to his house. I said I can't because it wasn't okay with my family. He said he would drive me home, and I firmly said no. He said if I came with him that I could get the tote for free. I got a very uneasy feeling. He said, "Hey, your address is 234 Letter Road, right?" My heart dropped into my stomach. I got freaked out and ran all the way home. I got home and ran upstairs like a demon was chasing me. I got in my room and locked all the doors and windows. I also covered them with black clothing and such. That night I was shaking like crazy. And then, I heard a hefty man coming up the stairs. Almost no one on my floor was up this late, and no hefty man lived there. I heard a voice, and I almost fainted. "Hey, you still want that tote? It's down in my car, come help me get it." I almost puked and fainted. I looked through the peephole to see the man's back facing my door. I watched him turn around, and I covered the peephole with a black shirt I had laying around from before. The doorknob started to wiggle. I went under the sink cabinet and was silent as a worm. He started to try to kick the door down, and eventually he did. I felt like I was ready to die. I grabbed an old broom that was sitting in the cabinet. The kicking down of the door woke up my neighbors, who came running in with a baseball bat. My neighbor whacked the guy in the face with the bat, and the guy fell to the floor. I got out with the broom and gave the man a wimpy whack before he stood up and tried to grab me. I physically jumped down the stairs and ran down the street to my sister's work like I was going to die, and I thought I was. I ran to the nurse's station and started to have a breakdown. I was crying and almost throwing up, and the nurses looked at me like I was just raped or something. I told them that a man was following me and was going to kill me. They got my sister and called the police. It turned out he was a serial rapist. Me and my sister moved, and she went away to college. When you decide to use Craigslist, make sure you deal local, and if something seems too good to be true, it usually is. I was 20 years old, still driving my grandpa's old Buick that he handed down, and I hated it. I wanted to drive something cooler and something more age-appropriate. Well, I was making decent money, and I wanted to buy a Mustang, so I started searching Craigslist. And within a week, I found something that seemed unbelievable. A 2013 blue Mustang GT convertible, manual transmission, no accident history, with only 32,000 miles, and a shockingly low price of $16,000. I saw the ad was just posted 4 minutes ago, so I knew I had to act fast. I called the number listed, but it just went to voicemail. I called again, and this time on the 4th ring, a man picked up the phone. I told him I was interested in the car, and he started laughing and joking about how he had just listed it a few minutes ago. He honestly sounded almost too normal and friendly. He gave me his address, and I told him I'll be over at 6 to check it out. After hanging up and realizing this guy sounded normal, I was just so excited to think that I had just found such a good deal. I GPS'd the location. It was a long drive, about an hour. It took me far away from the suburbs that I was used to. The GPS said 2 minutes remaining in the drive, and I was kind of confused. The area I was in was very rural and poor. I pulled up to what the GPS said was the house. It was a shitty rundown old thing. I noticed there was no Mustang anywhere in sight. I felt uncomfortable with even getting out of the car. In fact, I just sat there looking at the house for a good 5 minutes, trying to decide if I should even go and knock on the door. An hour isn't by any means a short drive, but when something seems as sketchy as this seemed, you would understand. I saw the blinds from the window begin to shake, and then the front door opened, and a man, probably in his 50s, came outside. He gave me a wave and a smile. He actually looked somewhat normal. I turned the car off and went out to greet him. I asked him where the car was, and he said it was in the garage. He told me to follow him back inside. I didn't know why he was leading me into his house instead of the garage, but I went anyway. He made sure to shut the door behind me, even though I was going to myself. I was able to get a good look of his house, and I must say, it smelled disgusting, and it didn't have much, if any, furniture. He led me down a small flight of stairs and to a door. I heard some noises coming from beyond the door. The man just explained that it was his friend working on the car. That seemed weird. I also began to hear creaking coming from upstairs, as if someone was walking around. He looked up and said that must be his wife. I found it weird that he had to explain these noises. I wouldn't have thought it was weird otherwise. He finally opened the door, and I got a quick glimpse of his garage. It was completely empty. I took a look at the man, and as he stared back at me, I knew it was time to go. I didn't say anything, I just turned around and ran for the door, but somebody was standing there blocking it. I offered to give them all the money in my wallet to let me go. And then the first guy walked into the room with some sharp metal tool in his hand. I don't know what it was called, but I fled from the room in the opposite direction of the front door, and thankfully found the back door. I fled into the backyard and went around the house to my car. I made it inside and started the engine. I stared at the house one more time. Nobody followed me. I saw the front door open again, and the two men from inside stood behind the storm door and just seemed to stare me down. I gave them the finger and drove off halfway down the road before calling the cops. I stayed nearby until I saw the cops pull up to the house. The two men, or however many people were in that house, were gone. Nobody had actually lived in that house for years. I went home feeling angry and disturbed, but also grateful that I escaped with my life. That night, I got a phone call from an unknown number at like 2 in the morning. I didn't answer, and they didn't leave a voicemail. 10 seconds later, I got a text from the same number saying, "Look outside your window." I had my blinds down and feared what might be on the other side, but I had a pretty good feeling. I called the cops yet again, letting the person outside know that I was as well. They arrived in a surprising 3 minutes and began to search the whole premises. They found him hiding in my bush outside my window. He was arrested. His name is Tony Schelling. He was in fact the same person I met at the house. My message to all is to not be an idiot while using websites like Craigslist. A man and woman went to Las Vegas for their honeymoon and checked into a suite at a hotel. When they got to their room, they both detected a bad odor. The husband called down to the front desk and asked to speak to the manager. He explained that the room smelled very bad and they would like another suite. The manager apologized and told the man that they were all booked because of a convention. He offered to send them to a restaurant of their choice for lunch, compliments of the hotel, and said he was going to send a maid up to their room to clean and to try and get rid of the odor. After a nice lunch, the couple went back to their room. When they walked in, they could both still smell the horrible odor. Again, the husband called the front desk and told the manager that the room still smelled really bad. The manager told the man that they would try and find a suite at another hotel. He called every hotel on the strip, but every hotel was sold out because of the convention. The manager told the couple that they couldn't find them a room anywhere, but they would try and clean the room again. The couple wanted to see the sights and do a little gambling anyway, so they said they would give them 2 hours to clean and then they would be back. When the couple had left, the manager and all the housekeeping staff went to the room to try and find what was making it smell so bad. They went through the entire suite and found nothing. So the maids put in new sheets, new towels, took down the curtains and put new ones up, cleaned the carpet, and cleaned the suite again using the strongest cleaning products they had. The couple came back 2 hours later to find the room still had a bad odor. The husband was so angry at this point, he decided to find whatever the smell was himself. So he started tearing the entire suite apart. As he pulled the top mattress off the box spring of the bed, he found a dead body of a woman. Me and my wife were on our honeymoon in Hawaii. We were on the island of Oahu, sitting on the beach. My wife got up to go to the bathroom, and when she got back, she told me that there was a creepy man watching her walk into the bathroom, and when she tried to walk out, he blocked her path. She only got away because there were 2 other people walking into the bathroom, so he got out of the way. I asked her what the man looked like, and she looked over, but unfortunately, she said he was gone. Our hotel was walking distance from the beach, so we got back quickly, but we made sure to report the man to a police officer we saw walking on the beach, and then we washed up before going out to eat. We ate at a fancy seafood place and did some walking around afterwards. Close to midnight, we finally went back to the room and began to wind down. Then we got a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole of the door and saw a man in a maid uniform standing outside. I opened the door and he immediately tried to let himself in. I pushed him back a bit, asking him what he wanted. He told me he left something in the room while cleaning earlier and needed to get it out. The only thing, we left the do not disturb sign on the door all day. Then I noticed he was making eye contact with my wife. My wife then screamed, "That's the man!" I didn't understand at first, but it was too late for that. The man had already lunged at me, holding my throat with one hand while reaching behind himself with another. He pulled out a knife and started swinging at me, and if it weren't for my wife coming over and smashing his face with the lamp, I would have been as good as dead. The commotion drew out all the inhabitants of the neighboring rooms. One of the women started freaking out and screaming, making the situation worse. We called the police, and so did the hotel. It turned into a huge, horrible scene, but we were just happy to be alive. We were questioned when the police arrived, and some of the other people around us claimed to have witnessed it all. We still don't know what kind of intentions this guy had, but if I had to guess, I would say he wanted to get to my wife. He must have been one very dumb person to think he would get away with something like this in such a public building. Me, my wife, and 2 kids were taking a drive all the way down to Florida from New York to go to Disney. We were in Georgia at the time, so close to entering Florida, and it was about 11 o'clock at night. I planned on finishing the drive that night just to save the money from a night at a hotel. My wife and kids were already long asleep, so I was trying to drive as smoothly as possible. On that quiet highway at 11 o'clock, there were hardly any other cars at all. In fact, I didn't see any lights until, up in the horizon, I saw 2 flashing red lights. Not police lights, more like SOS lights. I slowed down and proceeded with caution. Upon getting closer, I saw a car parked in the middle of the road, seemingly deliberately to block traffic, along with 2 cones placed on either side and 2 SOS lights flashing on the ground. Then, 2 hooded men of African American descent came from behind the car and started walking over to us. I put the car in reverse, ready to hightail it back the other way. One of the men came over to my window, and I cracked it open just enough to hear him speak. After asking him if he needed something, he said, "Yes, open the door." I shut the window, and that's when he began to reach for something in his pocket. I put the car back in drive and hit the gas. I drove over the cone and SOS light and past their car. About 1 minute later, I saw a pair of headlights coming up fast behind us. At this point, my wife was awake, confused and questioning me about the speed we were moving at. I told her not to make any loud noises before telling her that we were being followed. The car behind us began flashing its lights. And then, there was a loud pop, and I felt the car losing control. I did the best I could to bring it under control, but there was a second loud pop, and the car began to drag. I told my wife to call 911, even though it was probably already too late. By now, my kids were up, scared and complaining. I kept the car moving for as long as possible, but the car following us began ramming our trunk. My kids were crying, my wife was screaming at the police. I was sure we were dead. But by some stroke of luck, or more like a miracle, I heard a siren and saw red and blue flashing lights coming up in the distance behind our chasers. They veered off to the exit that we happened to be passing at that moment, and the police car followed them. I pulled over to the side of the road, took the phone away from my wife, and told the police everything. Upon inspection, I found out that our 2 back tires were blown, probably shot at, which I also told the police. 10 minutes later, a squad pulled up behind us, along with a AAA truck. They seemed rather thrilled to inform us that they caught the 2 men. Someone else had stumbled onto their little roadblock trap, but luckily managed to turn around and escape before calling the cops. When my sister was in her 20s, she was on vacation with her now husband, and one of their destinations was St. Martin. They had rented a car to get around and such. One day while doing sightseeing, they were on some side road that was rather isolated from any buildings or signs of civilization. It was a nice scenic route to take, but other than that, my sister tells me that it was a pretty dead road, so it probably didn't lead anywhere important. They eventually came up to something odd. There was the back of a car sticking out of the crops on the side of the road. As they pulled up closer, they could see it was some unbranded rusty neon blue car that had seemingly swerved into the crops. My sister's husband pulled up and stopped the car, telling my sister to wait in the car. He got out to check it out. From what my sister tells me, her husband looked through all the windows of the car for anybody at all. She watched as he then looked down and jumped back at something. She then got out of the car to see what was wrong. They both got down low to have a look underneath the rusty old car. What they saw was horrifying. There were 2 grown men with large knives in their hands, along with a bloody dead body laying between them. My sister's husband literally pushed her all the way back to the car and shoved her into her seat. The 2 men had crawled out from under the car and were now on their feet. He made it back into the car just in time to drive off down the road. They stopped at the nearest sign of civilization, making sure they weren't being followed, and called the police. Both of them seem to get uneasy when the topic is brought up, so we try not to remind them of it, but I can tell my sister has always been a bit different ever since this happened to her. I was 16 years old and the summer had just started. Our grandparents were treating the whole family to a 10-day cruise. It was a Royal Caribbean cruise, and we were going to Florida and the Bahamas. It was me, my 2 brothers, my sister and her boyfriend, my parents, my aunt and uncle, my 2 cousins, and my grandparents. I spent most of my time hanging out with my older brother, Rob, who was 20. We got to share a room together, even though it really wasn't allowed. We just claimed that our dad was staying with us in that room. So one night, me and my brother were in the nightclub of the ship. I snuck in using someone else's ship ID card. When I was in there, I noticed some older, creepy-looking man sitting by the wall, and I was sure he was staring intently at me. I made a point of moving around to see if he was really looking at me, and his head turned to face me wherever I went. I was feeling really uncomfortable, so I left right then and there. I coincidentally found my sister and her boyfriend sitting by the bar outside of the club. I sat down with them for a bit, and a few moments later, I saw the same man from in the club, now out by the bar, sitting across the room, and he was still staring at me. I looked away and pretended not to notice, but my heart was racing at this point. I contemplated whether or not to tell my sister, but I ended up not telling her. I don't know why. I left the bar and started speed walking back to my room. When I got to the stateroom halls, I was constantly glancing over my shoulder to make sure I wasn't being followed. I got to my room safely. I was extremely creeped out. I had a feeling this guy was some sort of perverted creep. I got a knock at the door, and I got a little nervous. I looked through the peephole and saw my brother, so I let him in. I did not see the strange man again until late the next night. My brother and I went with my sister and her boyfriend to one of the restaurants on board at like 1 in the morning. They weren't planning on going to sleep anytime soon, so I told them I was going to crash, and I walked back to the stateroom. But when I got there, I saw that the door to our room was cracked open a bit, and the light was on. I knew for sure we shut the door when we left, and there was no chance room service was in there at an hour like this. I proceeded with extreme caution and slowly pushed the door open completely. There was nobody in the room. I checked the bathroom, but it was empty too. All of our stuff was still in the same spot that I remembered it was in. I kind of just figured maybe Rob came back to the room for some reason when I wasn't with him and forgot to shut the door, so I just went to sleep. I woke up to darkness and the feeling of something brushing against my cheek. It was a hand. I pushed it away, telling Rob to knock it off, but when I noticed, even in the dark, beyond the figure by my bed, that Rob was in his bed, I let out the most blood-curdling scream you have ever heard. Rob jumped up and turned the lamp on, and there was the man from the club, standing next to me. Rob jumped on him and began throwing punches. I joined in and we took down the man. It wasn't even a minute before frantic knocking came at the door. It was my parents. My dad held down the man while we called the customer service center. They sent up 2 security workers, and he was sent to the jail of the ship for the remainder of the cruise. I'm not sure what happened to him afterwards, but this has emotionally scarred me, and I don't think I can ever go on another cruise again. I was the only one home one Saturday night. I was sound asleep in my bed when I woke up and heard Siri on my phone talking. I turned it off, figuring it was just a glitch, and went back to sleep. An hour later, Siri woke me up again. I was a little freaked out now. Siri was responding to a strange sentence, "What that found for us?" And Siri's response was, "The answer is Thursday, July 4th, 1776. It was freaky as hell, but I still ended up dismissing it as a glitch. One more time, I woke up to Siri speaking. This time, the sentence that Siri was replying to was my full name, and her response was, "Here's the info for my name." At that point, I ran to my parents' room, locked the door, and slept in there. I still have doubts of whether it was really just a glitch. I was home alone, playing computer games at like 2 in the morning, when a knock came at my window. My head shot around to face the window, but there wasn't anyone there. It was winter, so I had my windows shut, and my room was on the first floor. I guess you can call me the unconfrontational gamer type, so all I did was just shut my blinds to let the pranksters know that I wasn't interested. Enough time passed where I was able to forget about the knocking and get back into my game, until another steady set of knocks came at the window. I was so uneasy now. Why were they doing this? Why couldn't they just leave me alone? But by the slim chance that they actually needed something, I lifted the blinds and pulled open my window just a crack. That was the biggest and most foolish mistake I'd ever made. 2 hands from the darkness outside grabbed the bottom of the window and pushed it all the way up. I started screaming, throwing non-stop punches at the hooded man dressed in all black trying to enter my room. I grabbed the lamp sitting on my desk and bashed him in the head with it. He fell back outside, giving me the chance to shut my window. I saw him run away off our property into the darkness. I have never had a more horrifying experience. I lived way out in the country, like the turn off the paved road kind of country. I heard something crash on the roof and then smash into our metal chimney. For the next hour or so, I could hear it banging from inside the chimney, which should have been impossible since we had covered it for the summer. Then the front door started rattling as if someone was pulling on it, trying to get inside. I peered through the peephole but couldn't see anything. I finally threw open the door, and then everything stopped and went quiet. I was home alone one day in the summer. I was doing the usual watching of movies in the living room when I heard some shuffling noises coming from above me. Our living room ceiling is super high, so the attic is the only room above it. I lowered the TV down a little. I could better hear the shuffling noises coming from up there. The attic was connected to my brother's bedroom through his closet. I went to his closet and opened the attic door. The light in there was broken, so I had to use a flashlight. I only made it about 2 steps in before I heard the sound of the weak wooden floors across the attic creaking, and then the sound of something brushing up against one of the plastic bags on the floor. I jumped out of the attic, slamming the door shut and calling my parents. My dad had a look in there when he got home, but he didn't find anything. I'm just happy it's not my room that's connected to the attic. Me and my dog Layla were home alone. I had the music turned up loud in my room, and yet I was still able to hear Layla barking like crazy at something. As I was leaving my room and walking downstairs, I heard Layla stomping down the basement stairs, still barking. I followed her, turning the basement light on. She was in an attack stance, barking at the closed door to the boiler room. I knocked on the door, asking if anyone was in there. Layla was going crazy at this point, jumping on the door, scratching it, basically trying to break it down. I decided that if something was really in there, I didn't want to see what it was. I dragged Layla by the collar all the way back upstairs and locked the basement door. When my dad got home, I made him check the boiler room, but on his way there, he saw that there was a ladder placed on the wall by the basement window, and the window had been smashed open. My dad called the police, sounding worried, but I didn't yet know what was going on. Turned out Layla was barking at an intruder, and that I should consider myself lucky that I didn't open that door. It was very common for me to be home alone at night, as I only lived with my dad, and his shifts would constantly shift from days to nights. This happened around the time my dad was doing night shifts. I would stay up really late on these nights watching movies. It's always taken me a long time to fall asleep, so after turning off the TV to go to sleep, I probably laid there for a good half hour. Then, I heard a toy fall over in my toy closet. It was nothing too suspicious, but it still creeped me out. But then, the doorknob to my closet started to wiggle, until finally unlocking the door. I hid under my covers, not making a sound. It was strangely quiet for a good 2 minutes, so I finally peeked my head out of the covers. There was a figure standing next to my bed, looking down at me. I screamed at the top of my lungs and began hugging the wall behind me. The figure looked out the window and then just walked away out of the room. I stayed in that position for like an hour before checking if he was really gone. The front door was left wide open, so it seemed he had left. I didn't get a minute of sleep that night. This story is from the point of view of a 16-year-old girl. I used to have a boy living next door to me that was obsessed with me. His name was Joey. Every time I would go outside, Joey would come outside as well, as if he were watching me through his windows, waiting for me. He was 17 and very weird, and he didn't seem to have any friends, as he was always home. I tried to give every sign possible that I didn't like this guy, but he wouldn't get the message. So I had to finally just tell him one day that I don't like him and to leave me alone. The look on his face that day is something that won't leave me. It was the kind of angry look a toddler gives their parents when they can't have a toy. Coming from a 17-year-old, that's much more disturbing. One night, my parents left me to watch the house. I was working on a school project when I felt my bed shift a little bit. I looked under my bed. I screamed as I saw Joey laying under my bed. I ran away while he tried to crawl out from under my bed. I ran to his house and rang the bell at least 10 times, telling his parents about it when they opened the door. Joey never came out of my house, so I called the police. His parents begged me not to, but I ignored them. The police found him still in my room and arrested him. Apparently, he admitted this wasn't the first time he had hid under my bed. They also found pictures of me scattered across his room. The most disturbing one was of me sleeping, and it was taken from inside my room. I live in the country, and more often than not, I was home alone. We don't have any neighbors close by, so I would usually just sit in the yard and tan on sunny days. There was this one time that the sun was out strong and I was tanning in our yard, when I saw somebody standing in the woods, watching me. I sat up in a position ready to get up and run. Do you need something?" I yelled. The guy walked out from the woods and over to me, telling me that he lives up the hill and was wondering if I could help him out with a broken water pump. I told him that I was about to head out and that I didn't have time. It was a lie, of course, but there was no way I was going with him. He walked off back into the woods until passing a boulder, and I couldn't see him anymore. I was more creeped out than I'd ever been in my life. So with that, I folded my lounge chair up and went inside, being sure to lock all the doors and windows. You would think it ended there, but it didn't. About an hour later, I realized I forgot my sunglasses outside in the grass, so I went back out to get them. I made sure the guy wasn't anywhere in sight before going out there. It took me a little while to finally find my sunglasses, and as I feared, when I looked up, I saw the guy again. This time though, he wasn't in the woods. He was kind of hiding behind our shed so that only half of his body was visible. I yelled that I was calling the cops and ran back inside to do just that. The cops came and took down my description of the guy. Fortunately, I've never seen him since. This happened to me when I was really little. I was 7 years old, but I still remember all of it like it happened yesterday. I was sleeping over my grandma's house, like I always did when I was little. She never drove her whole life for some reason, so she would constantly be taking long walks everywhere. One day when I was sleeping over, she wanted to walk all the way to the library, which was like 10 blocks away. I didn't want to take that walk, I was a lazy kid, so she went off and told me not to answer the door to anyone. My grandma was the kind of person that was strict and she didn't baby people, so it wasn't unusual for her to leave me by myself at such a young age. Sometime while I was alone, the phone rang. I, being a dumb and curious little boy, answered it. It was a man on the other end. I remember he said, "Who is this?" I said, "Danny." "Are your parents home, Danny?" I said, "No." "So you're home alone right now, Danny?" I said, "Yes." "Where are you at right now, Danny? Do you know the address?" Somewhere in Queens," I told him. "Alright, Danny, bye-bye now." He hung up. I don't even remember thinking twice about it, but the story didn't end there, unfortunately. I'd say almost an hour later, a knock came at the door. I remembered what my grandma said, so I remained on the couch. "I see you on the couch, Danny." My little heart sank. I noticed him through the window. He was on the porch, staring at me. He was a very creepy looking man, all gray, ugly, and a fat beer gut. I told him to go away.
I got some candy in my truck. Come on out, Brody.
I ran to the guest bedroom that I slept in and locked the door. Moments later, I heard the back door being fiddled with, followed by banging and thumping as he tried to break down the door. By some miracle, I heard the loud voice of my grandmother as she yelled at him to get the hell out of the yard and that she's calling the cops. I watched through the window as the guy took off in his ratty pickup truck as my grandma tried to get the plate number. Unfortunately, she didn't remember it, but she still reported him and his vehicle to the cops. My mom never trusted my grandma to watch me again after that, but I still know that if she had arrived even 10 minutes later, God only knows what would have happened to me. I recently moved out, and I already have a horror story to tell. The house I moved into isn't anything impressive, it's just a house that's appropriate for 1 or 2 people. But I'd say right away, I started hearing weird sounds coming from inside the walls. I first heard it in the kitchen, and then in the bathroom, but on night 3, I started hearing it in my bedroom. I was sure there was some kind of animal living in my walls. I just had to figure out how to get rid of it. The next morning, I didn't even have enough milk to fill the bowl of cereal. I couldn't believe I hadn't realized I needed more milk. In fact, I seemed to be eating up all of my food pretty fast. I woke up in the middle of that night to the sound of breathing. Not my breathing. It sounded just like the breathing of a person. I flipped the lamp on and it stopped. I chalked it up as my mind playing tricks on me after waking up. The next day was really hot, so I turned on the AC for the first time. I checked every single vent, and some of them weren't blowing any air, one of them being the vent right next to my bed. I peered through the vent with a flashlight. There wasn't even a duct behind the vent. It was just the inside of the wall. It seemed that whatever air duct was in there had been removed. Unfortunately, I didn't look into the air conditioning system while buying the house, so I didn't know about this. That night, I had to sleep in the heat with no AC, so I was up pretty late, constantly rolling around and flipping the pillow over. Then I eventually started to hear the breathing again, but this time I was fully awake. I knew it was real this time. It was coming to my left. I looked to my left at the air vents. The sound was surely coming from in there. I grabbed the flashlight again and shined it in through the vent. I dropped it and screamed. There was someone's face peering through the cracks of the vents. The first thing I saw were their eyes, open wide and glowing. I screamed all the way down and out the house. I soon found out there was a crazy, dangerous homeless man living in my walls, and he had been eating my food ever since I moved in.